Sinn Féin's health spokesperson in the Republic appears to have waded into the culture wars on gender following the UK Supreme Court's ruling. The ruling found that for the purposes of equality legislation, a woman means a biological woman, and sex refers to biological sex.
Yeah, so I think the reason that we're seeing this happening at the moment is because Sinn Féin lost a significant chunk of their vote in the southern election, in the last general election. Sinn Féin have been flip-flopping on a number of different issues, be it immigration, the hate speech or the censorship legislation, the referendums to delete the word mother and woman from the Constitution. They've been changing their policy on these issues, and as a result of that, they have suffered significantly at the polls in the last election. And I think, you mentioned it, there's been a big shift in people's views in the south of Ireland in the last number of years on a range of different issues. And I think Sinn Féin are looking to catch up with those to make sure that they don't lose any further ground. Gender ideology, which was intellectually very, very popular and fashionable about 10 years ago, I think people are coming more to a kind of a science approach towards gender in the last number of years. And I think Sinn Féin realise that they're in difficulty if they allow for a widening gap between themselves and the general population. So definitely Sinn Féin were absolutely rock solid behind gender ideology until recently. They whipped all their TDs to vote for the Gender Act in the South in 2015. They were fully in support of puberty blockers, even despite the fact that there's a lot of scientific evidence to say that puberty blockers had a negative effect on children's development. They were very strongly involved in support of gender affirmation, again against the preeminent scientists in the South around these issues. And I think they realise now they've lost ground, and that's why they're changing on this issue.
So for you, it's an electoral question for them.
I think the difficulty for Sinn Féin is it's tried to straddle two sides of the electoral landscape. So in other words, for many years it was an anti-establishment political party, and then it tried to kind of show itself to be a safe pair of hands, and moved to the centre with and tried to make itself more attractive to the media, for example. And then I think a lot of its anti-establishment vote got angry at this, and then they started to leave. I do think as well it's important to recognise that Sinn Féin has always been kind of a broad church. There has, what I would say, been a very strong Republican element to Sinn Féin. There's also a very strong left-wing and probably hard-left political strain within Sinn Féin as well. Other leaders like Gerry Adams has managed to hold those two elements pretty much together solidly. But we've seen in recent years that those two elements have become
interesting.
Less cohesive in terms of their ability to offer a political approach. And I think that's why they're suffering at the ballot box.
Please, Aoife, comment on that and also on this text from one of our listeners who says sometimes, quote unquote, progressive policies are a step too far for the more socially conservative elements within the Republican movement.
Yeah, I would say I can't believe it's a miracle that me, Mal and Patter all agree, but I would say that what I would say is that Sinn Féin, as I said, are a broad church. And what I would like to come back to is a
coalition, you might say, of different perspectives.
A rainbow coalition, if you would have it.
Well, I don't know. We'll have to check.
But what I would say, right, and I take issue with a lot of what Patter said there, but what I would also like to come back to is we're talking about as a change in policy. This is one tweet by one TD. In 2015, Patter, in 2015, they signed on to, we have had this bill since 2015 and we've had no issues with it. This is a manufactured argument that's happening in London. Why David Cullinane felt the need to wade into it, I don't know. But it is a populist, as Patter was saying, there's a populist argument here.
There's a lot of women's groups in the south of Ireland at the moment who are angry in terms of, let's say, male-born sex offenders.
Okay. And you must take exception to that. Across the island, women's sector organisations are united in their trans inclusivity, apart from a handful of individuals who try to portray.
One at a time, Patter.
Yeah, see, and this is one of the things, right? So when we have these debates, it is really important that we don't shut people's voices down. This is a complex situation. There are people who suffer from gender dysphoria, and people who it's not an easy issue. It's a very challenging issue. They need all the support that they can get, but that support must be based on science and it must be based on evidence. And unfortunately, in many Western countries over the last 10 years, that hasn't been the case. We need to get back to that science. And I think that ruling yesterday by the Supreme Court in Britain was a reaffirmation of the scientific facts.
Right.
And that's where we need to start, with support for people who suffer from gender dysphoria.